Hello and welcome to your Wednesday video. We are going to be reviewing for your exam on Monday. So I'm going to talk all about how the exam is going to work today, as well as I want to go over the practice handout that I gave you. So I'm actually going to start with that by ways of review to see if you've got the correct answers. So if you have not done this little activity yet and you want to make sure you can test yourself on it, you might not want to watch this video just yet because I'm going to go over it and give you the answers. And I believe that sometimes trying it yourself first and making you actually think about it, I know it's difficult, making yourself think about it can actually be really helpful in trying to understand it. So in this activity, I gave you 7 hypotheses or research questions and asked you to identify the independent and dependent variable and what type of hypothesis or research question it was. So let's take a look at number 1. Communication satisfaction with parents will be lower among children from divorced families than among children with intact families. So the first thing I'm going to ask myself is, what's being affected here? What is the outcome? What do I want to know? Well, I want to know about communication satisfaction with parents in particular. And hopefully, again, the word satisfaction gave away that this is the dependent variable. What affects your communication satisfaction with your parents? What are the independent variables that affect that? Well, in this case, the independent variables is your family status, whether your family is divorced or whether your family is intact. So I'll call that family status is the independent variable that affects that dependent variable satisfaction. All right, we have a period here. So we now know it is not a research question. It must be a hypothesis of some kind. So it's either going to be one-tailed, two-tailed, or a null hypothesis. Those are the 3 kinds. So let's take a look and see if we have a word that kind of specifies a direction. We do. Lower instead of higher. It's specifying a specific direction. If a specific direction is specified, then we already know which way it's going to go. That means it's a one-tailed hypothesis. The first one should have been very easy for you. What is the relationship between parents who engage in verbally aggressive behavior at sporting events and a child's verbal aggression? All right away, I'm going to ask myself again, what is it that is the outcome, or what is it that I want to find out about? Well, I want to find out about a child's verbal aggression. That's my dependent variable. What affects a child's verbal aggression? Well, in this case, again, it's parents' communication at sporting events. Either parents who engage in verbally aggressive or parents who don't. That's what affects a child's verbal aggression. So parents up here are parents who engage. That is our independent variable. And the dependent variable is the child's verbal aggression because the parents are affecting that outcome. Now, right here we have a question mark. So this one should be pretty easy. This is plain and simple a research question. Now, if you remember correctly, I'm very, very sad because I threatened to cut off Reggie's head if somebody got this wrong. And I just know you're going to make me cut his head off with scissors. And I really don't want to, but I'm going to look online and see if I can get some other bunny rabbit hand puppets to replace him, because I already know you're going to make me snip his head off. And I will do it. So please don't get it wrong, but I'm going to order some backup bunnies just in case. All right, number 3. Lectures utilizing interest-based examples should result in participants with higher scores on subsequent tests of cognitive recall. Ugh. Well, what do I want to know? Well, I think I want to know as the end result what affects students' scores on tests of recall. Is there something that I can do or somebody else can do to affect the scores on subsequent tests of recall? That is our dependent variable because it's whether or not the person used interest-based examples. That's our independent. So basically, if I use interest-based examples with things you're interested in, It's saying you'll get a higher score on your test. So it's whether or not the examples are interest-based that affect your score on tests later on. So lecture-based examples is the independent. Your scores on those tests is the dependent variable. Do we see a word in here at all? Because we've got a period, so we know it's a hypothesis. So we got one of three choices. Do we see a word that seems to indicate some type of direction? Again, higher scores. This is the key word here. They're saying higher, not lower, or we don't know. So very specific direction. So this is a one-tailed hypothesis. Females and males differ in their willingness to communicate. Wow, okay. What is it I want to know about? Well, I'm looking at what affects willingness to communicate. Therefore, willingness to communicate is my dependent variable. What's going to affect someone's willingness to communicate? Gender, whether they're male or female. Gender is the independent variable. I have a period here, so I've narrowed this down to it must be some type of hypothesis. Do I see any word in here that is specifying a specific direction? I do not. It just says that they will differ, or that males and females differ. It's not saying there's no relationship. It's saying that they differ, but we don't know which way. When we don't know which way the prediction is, it's a two-tailed hypothesis. So this is a two-tailed hypothesis. Let's look at number 5. This one's a little trickier. I tried to get trickier as I went along. There is a negative relationship between communication apprehension and an individual's belief that all students should take public speaking in college. All right, let's start with our outcome. What am I trying to find out here? Well, I'm trying to find out what affects someone's belief about whether or not you should take a course in public speaking. So at that point, I want to know what affects your belief on whether or not you think you should have to take a public speaking course. That means your belief on whether or not you should have to take a public speaking course in college is the dependent variable. Now, what affects whether or not you believe that? Your level of communication apprehension. Communication apprehension is the independent variable in this case. In your level of communication apprehension will affect whether or not you believe that all students should have to take a public speaking class in college. Now, is there a word here that indicates a direction? Yes, and it is negative. We're saying it's a negative relationship, not a positive one, it's negative. So it's giving a very specific one direction. It is a one-tailed hypothesis. Number 6 says there is no relationship between people who view a televangelist and people who do not, and their perception of a TV evangelist's religion. Okay, what am I trying to find out? I'm trying to find out what affects, one's perception of a TV evangelist's religion. What affects one's perception of a TV evangelist's religion? That's going to be my dependent variable. And do people who either view a televangelist or who do not view them on a regular basis is the independent, because that's going to affect your perception of their religion. So I never watch TV evangelists, can't do it. And if someone showed me a picture of a TV evangelist and asked me to comment on their religion, I would probably say something like New Age, cult, I don't know. Now, if I watched TV evangelists on a regular basis and somebody then later showed me a picture of a TV evangelist and asked me what religion they were, I might be able to pinpoint it exactly. So that's the independent. Whether people view evangelists or not probably affects their perception of their religion, of the TV evangelist's religion. Okay, I have a period at the end of the sentence, so I know it's a hypothesis. Is there a word that gives a direction here? I do not have any word that's giving a specific direction, nor do I have any kind of there will be a relationship or there will be an effect. As a matter of fact, this is telling me there's no relationship. So this is a null hypothesis. This is a null hypothesis. And number 7 was one I did in class, but I threw it back on here because a couple of you were confused. The amount of verbal abuse of strangers will be positively related to your use of defensive communication or to defensive communication. So I want to know what makes people use defensive communication. Defensive communication is my dependent variable. What can affect whether or not someone uses defensive communication? Well, the amount of verbal abuse of strangers may affect that. If you get a lot of verbal abuse from strangers or if you do not, which makes that the independent variable. It's the one you're manipulating to get to the effect. I have a sentence here. There's a period at the end. This must be a hypothesis. So now I'm looking again for a word that gives me some kind of direction or relationship. I see one, positively. This is saying it is going in the positive direction. It will not be negative. It is a very specific one direction. This is a one-tailed hypothesis. I hope this quick little exercise was helpful to you as you prepared to understand independent and dependent variables and hypotheses and research questions. So now I'm going to flip over to the study guide and pretty much walk through it and tell you what I think is important. I will go ahead and reference your textbook as well. I followed your textbook very closely in terms of the first chapters here. So you should be able to get a good idea just from the textbook alone. So the first thing we discussed was the notion of academic research versus proprietary research. That is also the case right in chapter 1. They give you the definitions. So if you missed a specific definition for those two words, they are on page 5. One of the unique things about academic research, we saw this in one of the videos we watched, is that academic research also is peer reviewed. And that is also talked about in your textbook. What it means to be peer reviewed is it means other people in my field review what I've done and make sure my research is solid. What is a theory? Well, we wanted to define that right off, and your book does that. But a theory is really something that we can explain. A theory explains a particular phenomenon. And when we have a phenomenon that occurs again and again and again, and we seem to have figured out why that happens, we have a theory. Again, theory is the ability to look at a behavior and predict what's going to happen. Then it becomes a theory. There are some everyday ways of knowing, and I wanted to go ahead and clarify this because a lot of people thought these were the ways of knowing that we talk about in academia. They're not. These are just some what your book calls everyday ways of knowing. Okay, and the idea here is I kind of set this up, if you remember back when I was saying, where do you get your information and how do you know it's good? Most of the information we get on each day, we simply filter through these everyday ways of knowing. They are not necessarily paradigms or research methodologies. They're just generic ways we know things. We said we know things by tenacity. It's common knowledge. Anyone would know that. You need air to breathe. We have gravity. You probably won't find this funny, but I found it funny. I think a student emailed me and said, "Hi, I'm a rising senior in the blah blah school." And I'm thinking, what the hell does that mean? Are you like not on Earth? Are you not in the same gravitational field that I'm in? Anyway, I thought it was a funny response, but I'm sure the student didn't. And apparently I've learned that you've been taught to say you're a rising something. Man, get in the gravitational pull of Earth. We're not doing that. All right. Authority, an expert or an authority is someone who has expertise in the area or you view as an authority. It doesn't mean that they have the expertise, but you view them as an authority in that area, so you would take their word for it. And we know on a priori grounds. A priori grounds, remember, means prior knowledge or prior experience. So those are just some everyday ways of knowing, but we say really the best way to kind of go about knowing is through the method of science. And that's where the chapter 1 pretty much spends the rest of the chapter talking a little bit about the method of science and how we go about collecting evidence, making claims, and backing those up. So you can look, these words and definitions are on the exam, but I think you can read the rest of the chapter there. Make sure you know the 3 parts of the Toulmin model. And that is pretty much most of chapter 1. They do talk a little bit about scholarly journal articles and reports, and that is where you will need to know the difference between a primary and a secondary source. That was also on your library assignment, so that's in there as well. At the very end of the chapter, they throw in a little bit about hypotheses and research questions. So hypotheses are predictions about how 2 things might affect each other or what 2 things might have in relation. And a research question wants to question the effects or the relationship between 2 things as well. Prediction, this just questions. Both those are defined and they are in the end of chapter 1 on page 14. Okay. When we talk about the 3 big ways of knowing, we talked about paradigms or the way we go about doing something. A paradigm is a point of view. Remember, it's a different perspective. In academia, we have 3 paradigms or ways of knowing that we do research from. And remember, I spent quite a bit of time in this lecture also talking that there are many, many different paradigms in COMM. You probably learned in 300 4 different theoretical paradigms, but remember I said we have 3 research methodology paradigms in communication. Those big 3 forever and ever: interpretive, criticism, and social science. Now, I want to kind of focus in on these 3 because interpretation we also know as qualitative. It could be the same word. Criticism sometimes has the word critical or rhetoric associated with it. And social science typically has the word quantitative associated with it. And before, in the previous edition of this book, they even called social science the discovery paradigm. We've stopped using that word now. We just refer to it as social science or quantitative, which kind of brings me back up to qualitative versus quantitative. I do have, again, abstracts from actual research articles. Well, you will need to identify if the article is qualitative, quantitative, or critical. I am going to highly recommend the chart on page 26 in your text. It goes through the 3 major methodological paradigms in communication and explains each one of them. So we say that if we are looking at social science there, that paradigm is very objective. Okay. Reality can be known by the knower. We can find the truth, it says. It talks about the process, which is systematic and repetitive, and it is quantitative. Quantitative, remember, is usually using larger numbers and sampling participants in research with a survey or a questionnaire or some type of self-report. Interpretation, on the other hand, reality is very socially constructed and it's very subjective. So truth is left up to the person who's telling the story. In interpretation, we usually see interviews and we call that qualitative research. Qualitative research usually has very small sample size numbers, and again, usually participants in the research are being interviewed. Those are your keywords. Criticism Well, this is kind of an interesting one because criticism, remember, is again multiple different realities, but they're usually shaped by society, by political values, by religious values, economic values. Remember, criticism is really looking at values. And where we're trying to get a broader context in society by looking at and criticizing and analyzing artifacts, or again, something that already exists. So when you get those abstracts, if an article is analyzing Donald Trump's State of the Union address, that would be criticism. The speech has already been given, and we're analyzing what he said and potentially extracting what it says about American values in the speech. So that is criticism. Check out that chart on page 26. We did skip chapter 3, and I will be coming back to that, but we went over to chapter 4 and started looking at making claims. I talked a little bit about deductive and inductive reasoning, and those words are defined on chapter 56 when we went through the research circle. And then I wanted you to know the types of claims for each way of knowing. We did this a little bit. We have shifted now mostly to social science claims. Social science claims tend to be explanatory or predictive. And that's where we get into our research hypotheses in social science, which usually look at how two things affect one another. So we did an exercise in class when we were in the video where I said social science, what effect does communication apprehension have on public speaking? Right now, I know that's a social science question because I'm looking at the effect of two variables on each other. Remember, I said if you were writing a question, though, for an interpretive study, it's not about the interaction effects of two variables per se, but it's more about understanding the experience or phenomenon. So I might ask you, what was your experience like during quarantine? Or what was children's experience like with their parents having to go live back home? How did that experience change your communication? And if I were going to make a claim or a research question or hypothesis for the critical way of knowing, I might again look at movement that's already happened or an artifact and make a claim about the value on society. I think that the Black Lives Matter movement is having a critical impact on racial inequality in the United States. And I might analyze the Black Lives Matter movement and look at how do we have equality? Do we not have equality? We're still debating that in our society, apparently. I think it's pretty clear to say we have not reached equality for all by any means. So a critical research question would mention the artifact and something that we're analyzing and potentially some value. All right, this is where in this chapter, we also got into the whole notion of independent and dependent variables, which I just went over. Remember, those are defined for you on 59. Now, chapter 4 in particular throws a lot of other terms in there for you. I am not asking you those terms. We will be coming back to them. I just do not like the way the text lays out the information. It does not make complete sense to me. So look at it, but don't worry about terms I haven't mentioned yet. We are going to come back and talk about sampling and validity and reliability and all that good stuff. But I do want you to know the difference between a research question and hypotheses, as well as an independent and a dependent variable. So the test itself, the exam is almost there. It's not there yet. I haven't published it yet, so you can't see it. But it is on Monday, September 28th. It is due at 12 p.m. So how this is going to work is that means you have at 11 p.m. essentially a 10-minute window to log in and start taking this exam. It is 25 questions. I haven't finished putting all the questions in, obviously, yet. It is 25 questions. It is worth 50 points to you. Multiple choice, true, false, And then 3 other sections I already mentioned. The quantitative, qualitative, critical, abstract matching section. The identify whether this is a one-tailed, two-tailed, null, or research question section. And then a section where you have to identify the independent and dependent variables. So those are the sections of the exam. You will have 40 minutes to take the exam. I am not using lockdown, responder, browser, blah, blah. Okay, I know you guys have your phones, you have your textbooks. You only have 40 minutes, so it will go by quickly, which means you don't have time necessarily to look up every single answer. So I encourage you to at least fill out the study guide and spend a little bit of time familiarizing yourself with the material. Remember, Monday, the 28th, you will log in to your Canvas. You are not Zooming that day, no Zoom, but you are logging in and you are taking the exam at 11 o'clock. You know, if you log in a minute late or 2 minutes late, you've got some time, but that exam is going to shut down at 12 p.m. All right, I think that does it for what I think you should know for the test. I think I've given you a lot of information about the test. And of course, you have a lot of resources that you are going to have in front of you during the test. If you want to come Friday and ask any other specific questions, you are certainly welcome to. All questions are on the study guide. Again, other terms or concepts that were mentioned in the book, I am not testing you over. I will go back to those, or we are skipping them for now. So I will see some of you Friday. Otherwise, good luck on Monday. I don't think it should be too terrible, but I know tests can be anxiety ridden. Just please, for the research question, pick the one with the question mark at the end. Please, please. I don't want to cut his head off. Somebody's going to do it just to see if I'll cut his head off too. That would piss me off, but I'll do it. Don't doubt that for a minute. All right, guys, have a good weekend and take care.